Hey guys, Rubie here, and since it's October, you know what this means. It's spooky time! The whole month is basically Halloween. And here on Flight Rising, everyone is getting ready for the Plague Flights Festival and the yearly drama surrounding its skin and accent contest. So for those of you who are unaware, every year during October, the Flight Rising developers seem to be in a constant struggle with its user base on how to interpret and portray the Plague's flight, skin, and accent designs. So to start us off, I'll just first go through briefly what the staff believes how the Plague flight should be interpreted. And then we want to talk about how Flight Rising's user base actually interpret the Plague flight. And finally, I'll just wrap up the whole video with some of my own thoughts and opinions on this whole drama. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into this video. As the developers have posted a clarification regarding the skin and accent designs of Riot of Riot, Riot of Rod, I always get the two mixed up. I'll just read out selected excerpts of the developer's statement, and I'll link the full thing in the description box down below. So with regards to the developer's interpretation of the Plague flight, the devs state that Plague is about survival of the fittest. It is not the death and gore flight, but survival and evolution via pathogens. And you might already begin to see where this goes wrong, but let's continue. As far as the actual lore goes, zombies are in fact the antithesis of the Plaguebringers, and Plaguebringers, that's the flight's deity dragon, the Plaguebringers' goal. They aren't alive, they didn't survive, and they can't evolve. Undead creatures are everything the Plaguebringer abhors. Regarding the Plaguebringer's design, that has to do with the fact that plague and nature are different sides of the same coin. They're both all about encouraging the proliferation of life. They just go about it in very opposing ways. Survival and evolution, which is the pathogen theme, versus growth and preservation, which is the plant theme. This difference is reflected in their deity appearances. So first of all, we can already see that the developers have quite a unique and creative interpretation of the Plague flight. To the developers, the Plague flight isn't about people catching diseases and dying in horrible ways. In contrast, the Plague flight is more representative of the disease itself, how it is able to evolve and adapt to infect new bodies, thus the theme of survival of the fittest. So the Plague flight isn't trying to depict the people who die from catching horrible diseases, rather they are the depiction of the disease itself, how these diseases and bacteria evolve and change themselves in order to infect more people and thus prolong their own survival. However, so let's be honest here. When I say the word plague, what do you think about? The Black Death? The Spanish flu? The C virus? All of these diseases have resulted in millions upon millions dying in horrible and gruesome ways. And the truth is, no matter what the Flight Rising developers' own interpretation of the Plague flight is, they can't just erase people's common understanding and association when they see the word plague. And to be honest, Flight Rising's own map and aesthetics doesn't really help its own case either. When you boot up Flight Rising's map, one flight is clearly not like the others. The Plague flight's domain stretches across the land, acting not unlike an open wound on a world. Even the flight's own deity dragon seems not unlike that of a rotting carcass. So you've got these pale, spiny bones sticking out along the Plaguebringer's spine, as if the meat or like the skin on it has long since been peeled or rotten away. And it has like odd green lumps all over its body like cancerous growths. And even its wings are torn and decaying. And when you put these sorts of imageries together under the banner of plague, it just seems reasonable, and I would argue expected, that people would come to the conclusion that the plague flight is about, gore and suffering, no matter how much the developers argue that this isn't the case. So, what are my own thoughts on the matter? Well, personally, I think the controversy has less to do with the developers and its user base having differing opinions regarding what the plague flight is supposed to be, and more about the developers' seeming inability to understand why its user base has this different interpretation of the plague flight than they do. And to be honest, I don't think it should be surprising that the user base has a different interpretation of the plague flight. The depth of the offer as a concept is already quite prominent, and people are and will be free to interpret a source material however they like, even if it may be different or completely contradict the original offer's intention or message. And the Flight Rising developers should really have expected this differing interpretation of the plague flight with a theme and imagery that is so closely related to human death and suffering. However, should they just simply accept the user base's difference in this interpretation? There are probably good arguments to be made for both sides, but in my own personal opinion, I would say no. I don't suppose the Flight Rising developers necessarily have to accept its user-based interpretation of the plague flight if they really, really wanted to keep their own lore consistent with what they have in mind. However, one thing that I will say is this. If they were so adamant about skins and accents submissions for Riot of Rot being consistent with their lore for the plague flight, then they really should not have allowed skins that depicted imagery which directly contradicts their idea of the plague flight in previous years. If it really meant so much to them that skins and accents should be completely in line and consistent with Flight Rising's lore, then they should have reflected this consistency when picking and choosing skins in their contests. I think that some of the controversy surrounding the plague flight also seems to stem from the fact that developers just don't appear to acknowledge or show that they realize that, while perhaps not the majority, a significant portion of their user base on Flight Rising are not here for the lore of the game, but rather game mechanics, aesthetics, or other user interactions which are completely detached from the lore of the game, and it is unreasonable for the developers to expect otherwise. I've mentioned this in previous videos about how I absolutely hate how the Flight Rising developers just lock or prune threads just because some people just so happen to voice criticism in one form or another. And if locking one thread is bad, how about locking 10 threads discussing the controversy surrounding the plague flight? And oh my god, and that's just all the threads I've managed to find so far. Granted, some of them are trolls, and I can see why the developers would lock them, but all of them, even some of which are just people voicing their own frustrations, oh, you want to show how Flight Rising's own aesthetic doesn't help the developer's interpretation of a flight? Locked. You want to talk about Flight Rising developers' inconsistency when picking skins and accents for the plague flight? Just fucking locked. Oh, you just want to poke fun at the yearly drama that happens regarding the plague flight? Are you fucking kidding me? This is Flight Rising discussions. You're not allowed to have fun here. They're super. So, in my own conclusion, I think that the reason why we continue to have this drama year after year is twofold. So not only do the developers don't seem to understand why the site's user base doesn't share their own interpretation of the plague flight, or if they do, they don't seem to show it, but also to a certain extent, the developers just seem to have made its users out to be unreasonable for not having the same interpretation of the plague flights as they do. But to be honest, that's just my opinion regarding the situation. What do you think? Do you think that there's something more to this situation that I haven't covered or touched upon? Or do you have another opinion regarding the situation entirely? If so, I'd love to read more about it down in the comment section down below, and I'll be seeing you in the next video, whenever that may be. See ya!